All right, so I will hand it over to our speakers now, and please communicate with us via the chat if there's any issues or if you have any questions. And I hope you're looking forward to this as much as I am. Thank you.
Yep.
Go ahead. All right. So hi everybody. I'm Sebastian. Wear many hats, but the one that I'm going to wear today is as the scientific coordinator of CPN-Prev under leadership of Aida right here. And in the past 5 to 6 years now, we've been at CPN-Prev, the research team, mostly centered on doing systematic reviews of the evidence in the PPE field. So basically today I'm going to share with you some experiences that I kind of made along the way. This training was put together last week at very late hours. So I'm kind of test driving the training with everybody right here. It's a first for a bunch of things. It's the first time I do a kind of a presentation in English that is more than 30 or 20 minutes. And usually I do conferences, I don't do full classes. And this is basically a full class. So let's hope I'll get up to the end. And it's the first time I test drive this training. So you're all going to be my test subjects, or I'm going to be yours, one way or the other. So so basically we're going to go over some of the systematic reviews that we made at CPN-Prev, how we made them, and this is more about the how than the results. This is not the most exciting thing that I've ever presented in my life. This is very methods-driven, very details-oriented, and on the ground on how to do these reviews. So so bear with me, bear with us along the way. And there's going to be this is a presentation from the point of view of a scientific coordinator, which is the role that I occupy. So sometimes there will be slides about when to call the lead author to say be available in the next 3 to 4 weeks because there are going to be a lot of meetings, and how to handle and work in collaboration and train research assistants. So this is really from the point of view of the coordinator, I would say. So this is kind of, I'm acknowledging my own bias in this training. And I kind of realized halfway through putting together the PowerPoint, and I was like, hey, this is actually a training for coordinators, not for. So, I don't think you can say two words.
Yeah. So I think hello everyone around the table and also online. And if you want to comment and intervene, you can raise hands or simply unmute your microphones and intervene. We really are hoping this will be an interactive process. I think Seb is undermining a little bit the work. He's just very humble. I think through this training you will be, or the session together, yes, you will be looking at it from the perspective of somebody who leads systematic review teams, but there's a lot of details on how to conduct systematic reviews, the challenges that are associated, the frustrations, but the advantages also of systematic reviews, and most importantly, why it's relevant to want to conduct at some point in time a systematic review or a scoping review or any other literature review search that's related to that. So, and I think what we will be doing also is that we will be making it concrete for you. So we will be really telling you about the systematic reviews, a couple of systematic reviews we conducted, and the Delphi process that comes out of systematic reviews, which is one of the interesting reasons why we do systematic reviews. So that's kind of, okay. So maybe you want to bring your computer here then.
Right. All right.
Okay. So maybe let's start by saying why we should do systematic reviews. And what is different about systematic reviews as compared to other systematic reviews? So I'm not going to go through all the let's say qualities of evidence and all those specific reasons. I let you also read about that. It's very far as well from the screen, but I think systematic reviews have one clear advantage over many clear advantages over other generally known literature review. So I don't know about you, but when I started studying, the method of systematic review was not very accessible to me. As students or as researchers, we just, when we wanted to know about a certain topic, we just conducted a literature review. And you know how we did that? Well, we kind of started composing a research question and then finding relevant keywords and then going in literature and then searching the databases for those keywords and searching in books and articles. And then, drawing conclusions out of this. But the problem in that was that many limitations were introduced in the process because of the available, evidence, because of languages, because our own biases, or because our own knowledge in terms of how to conduct a literature review that is really accessible. Systematic literature reviews, what they have in terms of advantages is that they are a very systematized method. So what is systematic about them is actually the method, in the sense that every single step of a systematic review is a clearly documented step, has a clear reason why it's there, and this makes it reproducible. So, to test in terms of, so if another person wanted to do a systematic review on the same topic, same research questions, same point in time, normally they should come to the same conclusions, or the process should be pretty much similar to, at a high extent, a high level. The reason why we conduct systematic reviews is really to know what evidence we can trust, what evidence we should not trust, and what works in a specific domain. And we can do that because systematic reviews have very robust methods of qualifying the evidence. So it helps us have a critical outlook on evidence that we synthesize and rate in a way, qualitatively, the quality of that evidence that is provided. So it kind of sheds the light on research that, for many reasons, maybe we should not trust or does not provide as strong evidence as it does. So I don't know about you, but when I used to be a student and I wanted to read an article, I read the introduction and the discussion. And I was like, I understood it and I passed through the boring methodological details. And then when I started understanding about literature reviews, I understood that the first section to read in a paper is the methods, because this made me understand whether it was worth it to read the rest of the paper or not, because you'll clearly identify quickly the flaws. And in fields, systematic reviews have a lot been used in the medical field. And in the medical field, you do not want to make a medical recommendation based on flawed methodologies. So that would be, ethically even a problem. So I think that's the strong relevance of systematic reviews. It identifies successful, programs or interventions. It helps to qualify the evidence. It helps to identify the components because you can dig very deep into the data. And also it helps to identify negative effects or iatrogenic effects in order to avoid, reproducing harmful practices or oppressive practices. I don't know, Sarah,
Yeah, just a little thing. And at that point, some of you may wonder what is the difference between a meta-analysis and a systematic review. And on the literature search, it's actually exactly the same thing. The only difference is that a systematic review, you're not necessarily gonna quantitatively summarize effect sizes of an intervention or medication or anything. So it's like the goal of it. So usually a meta-analysis is really precise. You want to know if a specific intervention for a specific population is effective, and in terms of effect size, how it is effective. And for that, you need rigorous studies that are all quantitative in nature. A systematic review, you can do that. And at some point, when you look at the guidelines of organizations such as the Cable Collaboration, it's becoming so structured that basically they're asking you to do a meta-analysis instead of a systematic review, even though they're a systematic review organization. But doing a systematic review, you can include qualitative evidence, you can include mixed methods evidence, and you can do summaries of the evidence without only doing meta-analysis or quantitative summaries. So it gives you really more flexibility, and a very, very structured systematic review of quantitative studies only will be, I think, nearly indistinguishable from a meta-analysis.
Yeah, so I mean, even though in this triangle, you see that in terms of type of literature review or type of studies, you see systematic review below meta-analysis at the tip of the triangle. I personally feel that, particularly in fields where there isn't much evidence that is available, systematic reviews are actually sometimes even more relevant than meta-analysis, because the issue with meta-analysis is to be able to conduct a meta-analysis, you basically need quite a, I mean, in Campbell collaboration, they say that it's enough to have 2 studies to do a meta-analysis, or 2 studies, but actually you need studies that assess the same outcome in relatively using the same type of measures. And that is very difficult, because in one study that, in any study that evaluates a phenomenon, authors often will concentrate on different outcomes, or will not use the same measures, will not use it with comparable populations. So many of the meta-analysis are kind of reflect-ish of the literature. So I think we also wanted to always give you something that's more concrete and not just theoretical. So in terms of the PCVE field, which is the field of prevention countering violent extremism, why we decided at CPN to do systematic reviews was the fact that, first, the approach of, like, the field of CVE was very much dominated by security approaches and securitization, which actually left us practitioners on ground, social workers, psychologists, community workers, educators, with very little knowledge of what to do, because there was research being conducted, but no one kind of integrated this research together. And also, I personally remember in the field hearing about programs. So, for example, a Saudi program that had 100% success rate. And we started hearing about those programs that are so effective, like almost miraculous. And there were like desires to kind of implement those programs in Canada. And as practitioners, we were like, wait, what is this? Can we access the evidence that, was there a research that said, and how come this program led to 100% success rate? Just to give you an anecdote, one program about the Tamil tigers, and this was like very successful, but it was actually successful because the tigers got dissolved. So it wasn't the program; it was actually a social, situation that kind of made the program successful. So we were left with very disparate knowledge on a phenomenon, and like I invite you to think of the phenomenon that you actually work on and look at the state of the literature that you have and compare it to maybe what I'm saying. So we had very like disparate like pieces of puzzles that were not put together here and there, like it's a 1,000-piece puzzle. So it was very difficult to understand what we should do as practitioners in Canada. And we did not know what was established as an effective intervention in the field of violent extremism. I mean, if you compare it to vaccinating against measles, it's like established, but in our field, it's not established. And there was also limited culture of evaluation of programs, limited empirical evaluations. And there was very limited partnership between researchers, policymakers, and practitioners. And actually, those are the perfect conditions to conduct systematic reviews, because you want to bring all those pieces of puzzles together, use a methodology that efficiently makes you put those pieces together so you can have a clear picture of the puzzle, and meaning have a clear picture of what does the literature in the field of PCVE say, for example, about tertiary intervention programs that are effective?
And the other thing is that when you're on a field, I don't know, like for medical intervention, where you have a lot of studies on the same phenomenon that is really precise and that can tell you with that population, that age group, you can use that level of dosage of the medication, then you can like pretty much all base your recommendations on the scientific evidence. But when you're in the newer field, like the PCV field, then you're not going to find clearly defined best practice in the literature alone. So you're going to have a broad idea of what kind of works, what kind of less work. Some of the things are going to, this clearly works and this clearly does not work. But for most of it, it's going to be, maybe it works. And that kind of lays the table to do a Delphi process where you do the systematic review, you end up with kind of recommendations that are kind of precise, but not too much. And then you go back to practitioners to say, okay, so this is what we get from the literature, but since the literature is so limited, can you, improve upon that with your on-the-ground experience? And that's the whole Delphi process that we're going to go over in the second part of that.
So one other reason, so that's a snapshot of the field we were in. So in Canada, but also around the world, there were like some first initiatives of prevention of violent extremism that were funded. I think you can easily think about, for example, when mentorship programs were first funded in the country, or think about programs, interventions you have. And so in the beginning, most of the intervention and prevention programs were basically designed based on theory and expert opinion. So many theoretical models of how somebody becomes extremist. I remember like a lot of people talked about the FBI for the 4-step model, and there was like the staircase model and the pyramid model, and like all those sorts of theoretical models to explain somebody's trajectory to violent extremism, and programs were built based upon that, and the programs were delivered. And so at some point in time came the culture of, well, do these actually programs work? And so some studies, especially I think the UK is kind of the precursor, because they had their prevent government strategy, and there were a lot of empirical evaluation studies about this strategy. And then many programs that were established, for example, in some African countries were starting to be evaluated. So that's like the first yellow bugs, like empirical studies about their effectiveness. And these empirical studies then constituted the pool that we needed to synthesize. So we needed to go and look at those empirical studies, so conduct a systematic review, to take those empirical studies and to kind of, squeeze them and take basically the essence of those empirical studies. So these are lessons from the field, right? But then these empirical studies in the field of PCVE, and this is why systematic reviews are interesting in our field, but Delphi process is necessary. Generally speaking, you would expect that at the end of a systematic review, you have evidence-based best practice guidelines. So again, it's easy in the field of iron deficiency. Like you may have many studies who show that iron deficiency produces this and that negative consequences. And if you administer, like those vitamins that have iron, then you have a quick improvement in a person's health. Then you actually can generate what we call an evidence-based best practice guidelines for doctors to recommendation 1, screen for iron deficiency in all children, especially if there are so many studies that show that children coming from a certain area in the city or in the world have iron deficiency. So an evidence-based best practice guideline recommendation can literally be for children, families arriving from X area, screen for iron deficiency. Best practice guideline number 2, prescribe X, 3, assess 6 months later. Unfortunately, we cannot do that in the CVE field. And so this is why the Delphi process comes in, to produce not evidence-based best practice guidelines, but consensus-based best practice guidelines that help then design the new programs, update existing ones. So the systematic reviews are actually, learning lessons from the field. They become lessons to be learned by the field. And then you redesign the programs, and ideally you reevaluate and like that. And kind of you implement the guidelines, you assess the guidelines, and you adjust. So we wanted to present this because we wanted to show you that systematic reviews are not like an OVNI that kind of comes. It's integrated in a whole process, and they are, in French we say engrenage. They are that necessary piece that makes the clock work. In a process that is directed to producing evidence that you can actually rely on. And even if you're thinking about writing a funding proposal, those kinds of reviews are essential to make very strong funding proposals, because your recommendations and your objectives of what to do in your research or program, whatever fund you're writing about, become very clear because they're based on a clear set of extracted recommendations from the field.
And one thing we're going to try to do today is to kind of show you the ideal way to conduct systematic review as, let's say, the Campbell collaboration or Cochrane would have it. But we're going to also tell you where you should cut corners if corners have to be cut. And there are good places to cut corner, other less so. And we're going to try to give you like a kind of on-the-field experience where it's more where we can save time without increasing the quality or without much decreasing the quality of the output at the end. So some terms of engagement before doing systematic reviews. It's way more time consuming to do a systematic review than a literature review. So stuff that you have to know, do you have a lot of staff? You need at the bare minimum a coordinator and 2 research assistants, because you need to do integrator agreement computation between the research assistants for the selection process. So if you don't have 2 RAs, you're out. And then
David did the systematic review on his own.
well,
No. There was a literature review that was very systematic, but not evidence review.
Yeah, this is a continuum. Like it's not systematic or literature. You can systematically do a literature review even if you don't check all the Campbell collaboration boxes, like such as integrator agreement and stuff like that. Ideally, for research assistants, is even better if you want to move along more quickly. You have a lot of free time for the next 1 to 2 years, because it's what it takes. Like thinking that you're going to do a systematic review in less than 1 year is basically not realistic expectations, and most of them end up taking 2 years once you have to do the redaction process and everything. Third question: do you have hopefully adaptive but OCD traits? In this case, they will be adaptive. You need to take notes and really detailed notes at all parts of the process. So like the last one goes hand in hand with that. Do you like to take a lot of notes in the logbook? Because when you're going to do the Prisma statement, which is the number of articles that you had in the start, then these number went away in the selection, and these number went away in the method screening, and blah, 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 blah. If you're all over the place in your notes, it's going to be painful. So in this case, let's say OCD traits, not trouble, are probably a good thing to lead a systematic review. Do you like regular meetings, especially like the first and last phase, which is like the conception phase and the write-up phase? You're gonna have a lot of meetings, so I hope you like that. Do you like to conduct training? Because a systematic review is only as good as the quality of work that the research assistant provides. And it's easy to say, well, if I'm hiring the research assistant, they should know this stuff. No, that's not a good way to do so. You need to be able to conduct training, and in research method, the thing that everybody likes to have training on, of course. So do not assume that because they, has a method class at the first of their first bachelor year, and then we're now 5 years later, they have all of this in their mind. So you will need to do qualitative and quantitative and research design training, and you need to be able to provide that training or find people who can. Do you like to answer specific?
So.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Do you like to answer specific rather than large research question? And there's a caveat here, as I said, systematic reviews enable kind of broader questions than meta-analyses, but still it will need to be kind of defined, well defined, and we're gonna see later how at some points funders wanted us to do reviews that were so broad that they said no, we cannot do that unless you give us like $1 million. So also, do you have access to librarians? I went to a systematic review training in 2018 from the Campbell collaboration, and there was a guy who was an expert in literature search, and he basically did the following for the training. So he went to the room. He was like, all right, so the training is hire a librarian. And then he went away. No, and then he came back and actually did this training. But the thing is, you kind of need access to a librarian because there's a bunch of parts that you cannot really do without them. You know the underpinnings of a meta-analysis because it's pretty much the same logic for systematic review. Do you want to? Do you have a story that you want to tell? Because and it's fine. Some of the most entertaining papers and easier to read is that the author has a clear narrative and the author wants to tell their story, but that is not really the case when you're doing systematic review. They're going to tell the stories of others of the studies that you're putting together. And yeah, so basically, if you say no to one or two of these questions, that you maybe should do a standard literature review, and if you said yes to everything, then do a systematic review. And if you like to play your games on hard, then you can do a systematic review under systematic review organizations, such as the Campbell collaboration in the social sciences or Cochrane in the medical field. So basically, this is, as authors, we all like to be peer reviewed. It's like the best part of being a researcher. And this is basically being peer reviewed at all steps of the way, not just at the end when you submit the paper. So you submit what's called the title registration. So this is like, I'm going to do systematic review on that, and that is why I'm going to do it. And then they tell, oh yeah, good or no, and we agree or not to review your process. And then you submit the protocol. And then they're like, we're going to use these keywords in these databases and these languages and blah, blah, blah. And then you get reviewed, and there's a bunch of rounds of review. And then you do the review. And then you submit the paper, and then you get reviewed again. So it's kind of a Warriors Part 4, if I could say so. Yeah. So there are basically 5 steps in a systematic review, and this is according to basically just my own experience. I have actually not really checked textbook about systematic reviews. This is really like what I feel like has happened when I coordinated 5 or 6 systematic reviews in the last years. So the first one is the conceptual phase, where you're basically meetings between the funding source, the lead researcher, the coordinator, and you agree to what you're going to do, what question are you going to answer, what will be the scope. And for that, you absolutely need negotiation skills. Because what is going to happen is that the funder will want you to answer all of the questions for the next 5 years in a field, and then you're going to have to try to moderate the expectations of the funding stage, funding sources. And you're going to need experts to anticipate what is likely to be found in the literature in your field. So obviously, when you're doing a full systematic review search, you're going to stumble on papers that you didn't know exist. That's the whole point of doing so. But still, you need somebody who already kind of knows what you're going to find, because, I mean, so there's an example later, but let's say I'm going to use it now. So let's say, what do you think that we'll find if I want to do, for example, a systematic review of randomized controlled trials for tertiary prevention program or intervention program in the field of PVE, specifically for youth? What am I going to find at the end of that? Absolutely nothing.
There are no randomized controlled trials, so
So if
the
the
question is not the good question from the start.
But you need an expert to know that, you need somebody who
You need somebody
who knows.
Expert, or at least
Yeah.
somebody who knows the literature a little bit, like who's seen what's out there in the field, kind of in terms of studies, and who can say. One other example, it could be that specific or it could be large. So one other example is a systematic review on prevention of violent extremism in youth, with like a very wide spectrum umbrella of what prevention is. So that will take 10 years, because prevention is everything. I mean, prevention can go from civic education in schools, access to mental health services, you know, so does that mean that the author will read all the studies that are on prevention of anything that could lead to violence? So then you need somebody who knows the field to say, you know, you should focus, you should limit, you should concentrate on that aspect, because you will get so many studies. So it's a little bit in this sense, that negotiation around the feasibility and relevance of the research question.
The second phase is the bibliographic search phase, in which you search official and blurry literature with your keyword blocks and everything. And then you go to the selection phase. So most of the selection phase is done with title and abstract screening by research assistants. And then once you have a bunch of papers that are maybe in according to title and abstract screening, then you do full text screening. And if at that point you have a bunch of papers that are still in, then you go to the coding phase. The coding phase is where you do the methods screening of a paper. So are the paper reliable enough in terms of methods to be included? And then if yes, you do the coding or the extraction of data that is relevant for the systematic review. So the selection and coding phase is really centered on research assistant. They will basically do all the job, and your job as a coordinator is to provide training and provide the dispatch and monitor the dispatch to ensure that, you know, the project is moving along.
Yeah, but you also do read every summary of table, every summary of evidence, every coding sheet, and, you know, correct and make sure that information is not missing, making sure if in a coding sheet no recommendation is written, for example, or there is no information on, I don't know, the mean age of the sample. You have to make sure that the research assistant or that yourself have not forgot to put the age, but that the absence of this information in the coding sheet is actually because it's absent from the paper. So there's a lot of those details that you need to make sure are there. And the role of having always a team lead, even if there are 3 RAs and have one as a team lead, is to be able to constantly be able to check on that no little mistakes, little stuff forgotten happen, because it can change things in terms of the final results.
So in French, we call that like a travail de moine, some kind of month's labor, you know, with the copying scriptures. So yeah, you had a question.
I had a question about, you mentioned to assess the methodology. Are you using a criteria for methodology?
It's coming.
It's coming.
Oh, okay, sorry.
All of that is coming. And the last phase of the redaction and of the paper and the knowledge mobilization phase. So once you have written the paper, then you will, you know, have it read by practitioners, decision makers, researchers that should be interested by it, and also have their feedback. And getting their feedback, especially with practitioners, is the Delphi process. For that, you need good writers, author involvement. This is the point where you kind of call on your co-authors that were like the team, like the team lead, like the lead researchers and the co-authors are mostly going to be there at the conceptual phase and redaction phase. The other phases in between, it's more about the librarian, the coordinator, and the research assistants. But yeah, when you get to phase 5, then you say, hey, dear lead author, I hope you're going to be available in the next 2 months. And I've written how much time these phase take, and this is really based on a very subjective and my own advice version of that. So I think that most of the time is in the selection and coding, and apart from that, it's quicker, but you need involvement of partners, so you have to reach out. So there's a thing that is called covidence, and it's going to make me lose my job. So I've been introduced to covidence quite recently, and it is indeed fantastic. However, there's this whole thing about instead of giving a man a fish, you should teach the man to fish. And the goal is this, and and going to fishing is kind of more complicated than it looks, and it usually ends up in drinking beer in a boat. But anyway, what I was getting at is that this training is basically how to do systematic review without evidence. So you know all of the inner workings of a systematic review. But the thing is, if you want to use evidence because you have access to it via your university or whatever, I think you should use it. But you will be more prepared. It's easier to use evidence when you know what's going on under the hood than if you're just like hoping evidence does its job adequately. So so covidence, however, requires subscriptions. For example, at UQAM, we don't have one. At the University of Montreal, we have some. It can be quite costly if you don't have a university-provided subscription. So if you want to save money, you can also follow that training. And also, I did not have time to buy covidence stock before this conference, so please wait like 2 or 3 weeks for the time to buy stock. So let's go with the conceptual phase. What happens in there? First of all, sign the contract with the funding source, agreeing on the project outline, which requires meetings and negotiations. And as I said previously, funding sources are usually very ambitious. It's easier to be ambitious when you're not going to be the one who's going to do the review. And if they knew how to do that, they would not reach out to you. So in that case, you are the expert and you need to kind of anchor the ambitions of the funding source to tell them, because projects that are too ambitious are just going to fail along the way. You're going to get discouraged because it's never going to go along together. It's going to be possible to select articles because it's too broad and it's unclear what's in and what's out. So really, it's your job to as experts and project lead state what is doable and what is not.
So funding sources will always come with a big ask and really very little money to do the ask. So instead maybe of telling them you should give me more money, sometimes more money is not available. You should make your ask, like you should bring them down to earth in terms of what they're asking for, and explain sometimes why it's more relevant sometimes to answer a specific question can get us a long way compared to answering a too general question, which end up providing, commonsensical evidence that you would have known even without conducting systematic reviews. There is relevance sometimes in being specific in what we are looking for.
And there's also the kind of data synthesis part where if you're doing a meta-analysis, then whether you have dosage of a medication, whether you have 100 studies or 20, doesn't really matter. You're going to meta-analyze the effect size and you're going to go on with your life. If you're doing a more mixed methods or qualitative systematic review, good luck integrating qualitative evidence from 100 papers. Like it's nearly not doable because they all have their peculiarities, they all look at the problem from a different angle, and when you're trying to put all of that together, it's really, really hard to do so. So again, there's also this danger in going too ambitious or too broad. So then you need to clarify the project outline. So once the overall outline of the project is agreed with the funding source, then you need to kind of blend it in to structure it. So you need to think about the rationale of your systematic review. Why are you doing that? What important questions is the systematic review answering, which kind of relates to usefulness for science and practice? What is the gap in the literature that this is filling? There's our stuff called evidence gap map that can try to kind of map that and see where the evidence is lacking, and that can help you to structure your review. Then you need to think about the concept under study, which will kind of guide your blocks of keywords that you're going to use for the literature search. So for therapy and intervention, there's the PICO acronym, which is with the population under study, the type of intervention, the comparison group, and the outcome of interest. This is good for therapy, medication, interventions. But if you're doing systematic reviews that are broader, there's like, I've looked into that, there's like 15 different acronyms that you can use. Basically use what fits your bill. That's the more important stuff. But I've put the spiral one because I think this is the one that's good for qualitative and mixed method evidence. So there's sample, phenomenon of interest that's kind of is instead of the intervention. Design, research type, which relates to the type of study that you can include, and the evaluation. Then think about the objectives. Can you clearly word what you are doing? And to me, the logic model is even more important than the objective. Can you draw what you are doing? And when I'm teaching stats classes, and then my students are like, I don't understand anything. I'm like, just draw it. So what are your what is your dependent variables? What are your independent variables? What are your control variables? Just draw them. And if they're able to do that, then they understood. And usually I would say that teaching stats is like 80% anxiety management and actually 20% how really hard it is. It's not that hard, but at least introductory courses. So can you draw what you are doing is the kind of what the logic model asks.
And logic models are really very important because they are the rationale behind not only your literature search, they are the rationale behind what variables you want to look for in a study, what you want to analyze, what are the outcomes you want to concentrate on, and most importantly, what is the relationship between all your different variables. So for example, a logic model in one of the systematic reviews could be in the field of CVE, could be, we're interested in knowing, but let's say the impacts of a prevention program on the prevention of violent extremism. Okay, so on an outcome that would be no more violent extremism. If I go out with a question like that, I can be easily lost because what would be a prevention program? What does it mean, the no violent extremism anymore? Is it that the person is not acting violent, or is it that the person doesn't have ideologies? So the logic model really allows you to specify all that. So for example, it could be that my population of interest is, so my first problem is my first section is prevention program, but then is the prevention program, I can specify it. I can say this is like secondary, or tertiary, or primary. And in terms of primary, I can specify. Then I can draw the link between a prevention program and my population of interest. And I could have 2 or 3 populations. And then I can look at the outcomes, and I can look at the immediate outcomes. So does the prevention program provide immediate positive outcomes? I can draw a box for positive outcomes. But hey, maybe there's negative outcomes, so I can draw a box for negative outcomes. And then I want to know whether the immediate outcomes, whether the program also has intermediate outcomes. So an immediate outcome could be, for example, trust between the practitioner, the social worker, and the client. An intermediate outcome could be reduced depression or reduced anxiety or change in belief system. And then I could have a final outcome that would be, for example, disengagement from an extremist group. And so with this logic, I can then look, by reading a research, I can then look and see, does any research has included what type of outcomes? Did they classify the outcomes, so where they're positive or negative associations, and I can also rapidly see the limitations of the studies. I can rapidly see that this study actually did not define the prevention program. I'm concentrated on youth. They didn't describe the age of their clients, or it's older, or they only talked about intermediate outcomes, but they didn't include any short-term or immediate outcomes. So I hope like these examples are making it just a little bit more concrete. And I think I saw a question in the chat.
So the question is, can one study have a combined focus on therapy intervention and non-intervention purposes? From Camisola Anibasalu.
So it's a combined, can a systematic review have a combined?
Can one study have a combined focus on therapy intervention and non-intervention? So
Non-intervention means like a control group or?
maybe I'll let,
Yeah.
Camisola, can you unmute yourself and then you can ask the question, maybe clarify it?
Yes, good morning all, and thank you for this beautiful program. I want to find out if it's possible in a study to have a combined focus on the two. I am speaking against the backdrop of, a particular program in Nigeria called Operation Safe Corridor. It is a program organized that has two categories of participants: people who fled from Boko Haram and people who willingly left Boko Haram. So I'm just trying to see if we can study these two categories of, maybe I should call them inmates or population, using a combination of these two approaches that is looking at the outcome of the Operation Safe Corridor itself and also looking at the participants.
Yeah, so I just need to clarify one thing because I didn't hear well. You said people who have left Boko Haram and people who have not left, right?
No,
The sound here is not good.
Can you hear me? People who were forced to join Boko Haram
Want to join?
and those who were active participants.
That's right.
But the two of them are now in a camp.
Both of them are in a camp, and are they receiving interventions?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it's something that you can absolutely do in a logic model because one of the key features of your logic model at this point in time would be actually your samples. Yeah. So I think if Seb explains this logic model, you will clearly understand, I think, what we're referring to. So we had this logic model where we actually had also like three groups: no risk of violent radicalization, risk of violent radicalization, and violent radical behaviors. So you could very well say, I'm interested in two populations, and I want to see whether it's the effectiveness of an intervention, or it could be something else. Your question could be what makes some join and what makes others want to join but not yet join. So what is kind of making them hesitate? You can ask any question that is relevant to you. And then your arrows and the variables that will interest you, you're going to have to make them go through each of your sample. Okay. To see if they work and what conclusions. So I think Sam just
and in terms of aggregation of results, you can simply analyze your results by either outcomes, by group, by type of intervention. So let's say you wanted to compare the effectiveness of an intervention for people that did not yet join but were interested in joining, and then an intervention for those who not only joined but already committed violence in relation to the group. Then you could find out, for example, that hey, we found out that for those who joined, tertiary prevention intervention were really effective, but then for those who were kind of looking to join, maybe that doing an intervention had more iatrogenic effects than benefits. It depends. You can, I'm not saying that that's what we found, but I'm saying that you could do that if you wanted to.
Yeah. You decide what are the variables, what are the groups that interest you, and you decide what are even the outcomes that interest you or that you are looking for. as long as you keep your eyes open on positive and negative, harmful outcomes as well.
Okay. All right.
I'm not going to go too deep on the logic model because we mostly already talked about it with intermediate and final outcomes. Okay.
It'll take time to detail it, I think, because it's really.
Okay, so basically we did 2 systematic reviews, but that were kind of based on the same search strategy. So these were 2 systematic reviews. The first one was on primary and secondary prevention programs, and the second one was on tertiary prevention programs, but we did the search for everything and classified programs to whether they were in the primary, secondary, or tertiary prevention space, and kind of compare the outcomes of these programs based on their effects on, and which could be positive or negative, on intermediate and final outcomes. So for example, you can have a program that aims to, I don't know, reduce the distress level or improve employability in vocational training. And then, so these are intermediate outcomes. So you can say that, so there's always this question of the link between what you're trying to work on and then does it actually have an effect on violent radical outcomes, whether it be in terms of attitudes or behaviors. So you can make a program that aims to, let's say, improve self-esteem because you have a theoretical model that posits that people that do crimes or whatever, it's because of low self-esteem. Then you do a program to improve self-esteem. So first thing that you can check is whether that program actually improves self-esteem between the pre-program measure and post-program measures. And then if there's an improvement, you say, hey, my program worked to improve self-esteem. But for that to also be useful in preventing violent extremism, you also need to ensure that in this case, self-esteem is a risk factor, or lack of self-esteem is a risk factor for violent radical behaviors. And then if you kind of look at recent systematic reviews and meta-analysis that came out, it's kind of the opposite. Too much self-esteem is a risk factor, not lack of self-esteem. So then you would probably have a problem. If you only assess your program with intermediate outcomes, you can say, our program is great, our participants there, they improve self-esteem, it's fantastic. But then somebody could say, yeah, it actually help in preventing violent radicalization. And then you say, oh, we don't know, probably. But then another study comes and then you say, hey, finally, improving self-esteem can not necessarily a useful thing if your only goal is to prevent radicalization. And maybe if your goal is the well-being of persons, and that's also good in itself. So it depends on what your goal is. And in criminology, there's this whole thing about being funded by, let's say, public safety, which means that you have a dual mission: one of security, not security, one of protecting the public and potential victims, and also one of improving the well-being of clients. And often for us in criminology, these go hand in hand, but in other fields may not be the case.
So in terms of the logic model, for example, for tertiary PVE programs, this is one example of a logic model we developed. We needed to define our population. Who are the people of interest to us? But it was everybody. So we just mentioned minority and majority groups. But why didn't we just say everybody? Because we wanted to know whether there were differences between minority groups versus majority groups. And then we know that in terms of violent extremism, some people can have been already in the studies assessed for risk, so screening or assessment, detection, but some people not. So you can see an arrow where there is screening, detection. So we were interested in understanding the risk assessment tools, whether these risk assessment tools provide any benefits or whether these risk assessment tools have any adverse effects. We were interested about detection, like were people detected before they were put into a program? And was the fact that they were detected or detection methods were used made negative effects or positive effects on risk of violent radicalization? So I'm in the middle straight line. So in terms of risk of violent radicalization, then these persons received, let's say, a prevention. What are the benefits and adverse effects of this prevention in terms of intermediate outcomes? And you see some examples of intermediate outcomes. We put distress, knowledge acquisition, or negative stigmatization. But as Seb said, how does this actually impact the final outcome of interest, which is violent extremism? So we needed also to include violent outcome. But we know also, if you look at the right and the left, that if people are screened or are not screened, you also have people who have no risk for violent radicalization and people who have already violent radical behaviors. So we have three populations. So for these of no risk of violent radicalization, these people often may receive primary prevention programs like civic education in school, critical media literacy, democratic education, good health habits. All these are primary prevention programs. So we also want to know whether these primary prevention programs have intermediate outcomes. And for people who have extremist violent behaviors, we want to know the intervention programs, where are their effects. So this is like a very encompassing logic model in our field, because it includes all population, it includes the idea of assessment, it includes the three types of population at risk, the three levels of prevention, primary, secondary, tertiary, the intermediate outcomes, and the final outcomes. So this is a logic model for a systematic review that would take 5 years.
Yeah, yeah.
So you can decide to have that logic model 5 years, maybe 3, but you can decide to have that logic model, have it start with a big logic model and then chunk it. So that's what we did. Over 3 years, we chunked it. We did one systematic review, one part of this logic model for primary and secondary prevention, and we did another one for tertiary prevention. And it took us 3 years to do that.
Yeah. So this would fit into it in the maybe a little foolish and ambitious like class of systematic review. If we were to do it now with our expertise, maybe we would be a little more precise in the phenomenon that we looked at. But
But we don't regret.
yeah,
I mean, I don't. Maybe Seth does, but I don't.
no regrets.
Yeah.
Okay, so we kind of went over that. Sorry,
Yeah.
I did an example of Pico. This is an example of Spider, but I don't think we can go. Okay, so once your project, you have your logic model, your objectives, then you can go on to the determination of the inclusion and exclusion criteria, which are the criteria that are gonna tell you if a study is eligible in your review or not. And this can be on topics. So is it on the good topic? Is it with the good population? Is it with the good types of intervention? Is it with the good types of methodological designs? Is it in the language spoken by the research team, etc., etc., etc. And note that a bunch of these inclusion and exclusion criteria, some of them are going to be really precise. And it's normal if at the abstract screening stage, you cannot score all of the inclusion and exclusion criteria. Sometimes you're going to end up with maybe it's eligible, so you rate it as maybe, and then when you do the full text screening, then you can really rate all of these criteria. One of the things that was mentioned at the start is that one of the advantages of systematic reviews is that you can ponder the weight of results by the methodological rigor of the paper from which the results come. So that means that you have to screen the papers for their methodological quality or robustness, which is called in the field a risk of bias. And I think the field and basically medical field. So the risk of bias of the papers you are including or not. So I think that Brie had a question about checklists. So this is where we answer that question while she's not there. But it's recorded. So a lot of or maybe you can take a break and wait for them to come back because it's time.
I think so. Are we going to talk about the keywords and the literature search after in step 6?
Yeah.
Okay. But maybe I would have continued until 10:30 and took a break at 10:30.
Okay, sure.
And it's recorded, so we will.
She'll let you record.
And she just going to get some.
Yeah, it's gonna take time.
Okay.
But I mean, so you have to set what the inclusion, so this step is for literature review, so before you start going into the databases and asking the librarian to do its job, you have to tell the librarian what they have to do for yourself. So you need to set the inclusion and exclusion criteria, meaning what is literature that I don't want to read and what is literature that I want to read. And this is very important. So one example, if you are doing a systematic review on studies that have evaluated a prevention initiative, you will automatically exclude theoretical studies, you will exclude even studies that describe the prevention initiative but do not evaluate it. And you will only include evaluation studies. So that's an example of exclusion inclusion. You may decide that you want to exclude any thing that is not that is journalistic or even book chapters if you want. Like there is no, you decide.
Yeah.
You just have to justify why it's not important. It's not important to include that type of literature.
Yeah, absolutely. And the example Ida gave is really good. So one of this was when we talked about the fact that some of these criteria cannot be checked at the title and abstract stage, whether the paper describes an intervention or actually assesses the intervention. Often with the abstract, you won't know. You have to read the full paper for that, and that's fine. Just read it as a maybe and keep it for the next steps. So, coming back on the methodological quality or risk of bias, you have to kind of assess the methodological rigor of studies that you're going to include or exclude because of the lack thereof. And for that, there are multiple ways to do it. So we had quite the funny discussion with representatives of the Campbell collaboration at one time. So we kind of made a homemade checklist on 10 points, 10 items that look at are the methods well described, are the concepts well defined, are the methods appropriate to answer the research question, are there disclosure of conflicts of interest, blah, blah, blah. Basically, like a very lenient checklist that mostly looked at is all the essential parts of the scientific paper in there, or are there a lot of missing parts? And then we kind of made a score on 10, because 10 items being worth 1 point each, and we kind of decided that papers that are 3 or less would be excluded from the review because too many missing sections, we don't really. And then they told us, well, you cannot do that. You cannot assign scores, methodological scores to paper, and then select them or not based on that. Okay, so what should we do? And oh, we don't know. We're currently producing the guidelines. So like what? So yeah, so don't do this. But okay, so what should we do? All that we don't know. So that was kind of a funny exchange. But that was in 2018. Since then, they actually recommend the use of checklists, and even those that have points. So this evolves in the meantime. Basically, we never used a checklist as is. They're all unfit for purpose, at least in the PVE field. And for example, we received a suggestion from the Campbell to use the Cosman checklist, which is a checklist that is for the medical field and made as is. And we said, funny, but no. so basically, the Cosman, So we said, okay, we did not say no, we said yes, but we really are going to heavily modify it to make it fit for purpose. So most of the checklists, so for example, if you are in the PCVE field and you have a checklist that basically asks how close is your study to a randomized controlled trial, purely experimental, then you're going to exclude everything. Like nothing is going to be up to that standard, and you're going to have an empty review at the end, and that's not going to be very useful, and I will have wasted a lot of money. So you need to have checklists that are adapted to the state of the literature in the field, and that's why experts consultations are really useful at that stage.
Yeah.
To know what to anticipate and take a checklist that is fit for purpose and fit for the state of the literature in the field.
So you would go with what would be an ideal methodological study in your field, and inspire that checklist from, okay, so a good study would have all of these aspects. And, you know, Seb's example is good, because if you use studies from fields that are not relevant to your field, then you will have checklists that are not useful for you, that may exclude everything, just like if you have very, very numerous exclusion criteria. So I remember I was once at a conference where a person presented a systematic review, and that systematic review had only one study that was eligible. And it is also in the habit of systematic reviews sometimes to find, like, to read the 10 first pages of a systematic review, and at the end of the methodology find out that there were 2 studies or 3 studies. Great. I think what it says is that most studies seem to be very limited, were not included, or the exclusion criteria were so many, and then you get basically wasted a year to summarize a study that if you had read just the study, you would have gotten that. So for our fields of practice, we came back to the Campbell collaboration asking them to trust us and give us leeway to make systematic reviews relevant for practitioners, and not just like obsessively about methods. They are most importantly about what they bring to the field, not systematic review for the sake of doing a systematic review. So you need to convince colleagues around you of the specificities of your fields and the needs to adapt and have some, like, the good mean, you know, of the nature and quantity of inclusion exclusion criteria, and how severe you want to be in your rating of a quality of study. If you have a literature that has a lot of good studies, you can be severe. You can say a study that rates under 5, or that has only 5 of the 10 items, we will be excluding them. But if you work in a field of, you know, kind of evidence, you can say, I'm going to be large and include everything, but in the discussion, I'm going to tell people, be careful, this only means this, and you should not make it mean more. And these are all the recommendations to do good research in the field. So
that's really the.
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick question. When you went to the Campbell collaboration and basically said that we're practitioners, we want to include some other pieces here, what was the response like?
We had to wrestle.
I think in the beginning it was difficult because Campbell came from a very quantitative perspective. They didn't want us to include qualitative literature because this is like kind of not meta-analyzable, although there are meta-analysis in qualitative literature, qualitative analysis. So yeah, we had to educate them about the nature of the field and tell them that they will gain more by letting us, you know, do very rigorously what we do. It will contribute better to the field than just doing a systematic review that will end up having 2 studies.
Yeah.
So we included qualitative literature, but we don't meta-analyze the qualitative literature. We told them, okay, if we include quantitative literature, it's going to be like the skeleton, and the qualitative literature is coming to put the flesh and, you know, around that skeleton to give it meaning, because quantitative literature does not take into account the context and, you know, reflects things, but then the qualitative literature would. So they're accepting, but I think you need to, you know, some firmness and ability to explain your rationale is needed.
Yeah, and on that, this is really the choice that we made. So to be lenient in what we accept, which enables us to criticize the field as it is and not as we made it. So if we only accept very rigorous studies, then we're going to only present us very rigorous studies, and then we're going to have the impression that everything is broken on the field. just because we excluded everything that was not extremely rigorous. So saying 3 or less on our 10-point scale is really that the paper mixes basically all the sections, so it's not usable. So
Yeah.
that does. But papers that have scores between like 4 to 6, then there is valuable evidence in there, but there are also potential conflicts of interest, methodological problems that are relevant to discuss, and that we discussed in the discussion of the review. So we chose to be generous in what we accepted because it enables us to critique the field as it is and not how we made it be by selecting only your very, very rigorous studies. So yeah, I think. Step 5. So you have to produce coding sheets.
Do we have a picture of a coding?
Yeah, we do.
So
Right.
just to show.
Right there.
Yeah, so that is the step 5, the coding sheet, what you have to.
And we're gonna go back to that, but we prefer to use Excel sheets than, let's say, statistical databases like SPSS files or stuff like that, because when you're trying to summarize a qualitative study, you can just put a number. And even if we did a very quantitative study about the psychometric properties of risk tools in the field, so we have gathered psychometric studies, so they are quantitative by nature. But I would already try to summarize the factor analysis in one number. You cannot do that. So we even in very quantitative summaries that we did, we prefer Excel sheet because you can flesh out what is in the paper a little more. Which would not be the same thing if you were just doing a meta-analysis on the effect size of a program. And yeah, you could have a case, a block where you just enter the effect size of all of the studies and then meta-analyze them. But this is not what we're doing because the field is not there. So we're going to come back to that. Sorry for to take pictures. So I'm basically, we already talked about this. Yeah, we talked about this. So these are examples of the inclusion and exclusion criteria. We talked about that. So for example, this is a systematic review of psychometric properties in terms of reliability and validity of risk tools in the PVD space. So oftentimes, inclusion and exclusion are kind of the mirror image of one another, but sometimes it helps to clearly state what is out. So obviously, the study was about risk tool that assess specifically the risk of violent radicalization, but it can be enlightening to say that, well, if you stumble upon a study which is about risk tool for violence but not violent radicalization, then it is out. So you clearly state your exclusion criteria. So for example, if you state that you only want primary data and secondary data such as literature review, systematic review, meta-analyses are out, then it can be useful to state that clearly and then also tell the RAs, well, if you stumble upon a relevant systematic review, even though we're not going to include it in ours, leave it close so we can check the references, their methods, their keywords and stuff like that. Oftentimes, there's also a date limitation because you have to select an end date after which papers will be excluded, because if not, you're going to always update the review and then never end with anything. So this is an example. So this is an example of the quality of study assessment tool, like kind of the homemade 1 on 10 points that we made. So very simple question. Are the key concepts clearly defined? Are the research questions clearly stated? Is the choice of methods in line with objectives? Is the sample described? Are there enough that's detailed, etc., etc., etc. So what we did at the time, we thought ourselves very clever. So because they told us that we couldn't use the score of the checklist to include or exclude studies, we put this very clever sentence at the end, which is note that the quality rating of each study must not be interpreted as a quantitative measure, but rather as a qualitative rating of the presence of basic methodological criteria for some scientific researches. Well, I put on my monocle. So, so it's kind of our cop-out to kind of put these together, even if technically it was, well, if you have 3 or less than 10, you're out. So it was our great cop-out at the time. Here you have for references, and the PowerPoint can be made available, obviously, if you want it. So this is the some example of checklists that we use and heavily modify. So we never use a checklist as it's never, and not even close. And I mean, the Kazan checklist, you're gonna have like 100 questions on, like you're gonna have 15 questions on the way they did their, let's say, internal consistency agreement, and then 15 questions on the sampling, and then 15 questions on, I don't know, and then we're like, yeah, that won't fly.
So like those checklists are basically maladaptive, obsessive compulsive.
Yeah.
You gotta know how to use those obsessive compulsive traits, and I think when we're saying that, we're not saying that out of, it's because these are things we try, and later we're gonna tell you also about Campbell collaboration, sometimes asking us to redo lit searches, and we tell them it won't work, it will get nothing, and then they make us, then we have to work for 3, 4, 5 months, and exactly what we said is going to happen happens. So sometimes this is where you have to be like, okay, I hear your recommendations, I hear what you think, but I think that using a 100-item checklist to evaluate a study in a field where studies are emerging and qualitative, most of them, and it's just a waste of time. So that's,
And the other astounding thing is that these checklists are going to be scored by research assistants. We both asked the lead researcher to come in and screen all of the papers with and Haida's like 20 plus years of experience. These are going to be the research assistants, which are going to score a 100-item checklist about very minute methodological details that I mean, when I read the Kazan checklist, at least like I didn't understand at least 20% of the items, and I teach stats for PhD students. So now you're asking research assistants to rate that. I mean, in what world are you living?
It's. I think at some point in time we get into this kind of absurd situation where the tools are being. It's like when administration administers itself, if you know what I mean. So there's this thing of not just doing too much because you can go into that level of detail, but in the end, what is actually the relevance and the effectiveness on cost, time versus outcome? So please approach these methodological quality tools with a lot of a critical mind and make something solid out of them, but I think we advise you to question the necessity of using them exactly as they are.
And the method screening is a big point of failure in systematic reviews, because you're asking research assistants that did 1 or 2 methods classes in their curriculum to actually find out not good enough papers that often experienced researchers miss. And I can miss these, you can all miss these. And we're asking research assistants to rate like 100 item like checklists. So yeah. So training has to be like, if there's a point where you must do training on methods, it's for these scales. So I would say that if I had to recommend the scale as a basis, it would be the mixed methods appraisal tool, which is a little less like deep on let's say quantitative analyses, and a little more general. It can accommodate qualitative and quantitative evidence. So I would still modify it, but if I had to start somewhere, I think I would start with the MMAT. But we have used the Cosmin for the psychometric tools systematic review. We have used in the prevention one the read to scale, but we modified so much that basically we did what we wanted. So we took information for the RB2 rather than change 3 items on the RB and use it as is. So these were an example of coding sheet. So it's small, so we're gonna not go over it, but remember that as I said, using Excel coding sheets can give you more freedom of action than an SPSS program where you cannot enter text strings.
Yeah. And basically, there are some things in coding sheets that you will have to have in any coding sheet on any topic, like the document, creating an ID for the document, the title, the authors, the year, whether it's published, chapter, journal, book, a research report, those like the samples, the characteristics of the samples, the measures that were used, the outcomes. But you also, and like the outcomes and limitations, let's say, of the mentioned by the authors and recommendations mentioned by the authors. But remember that you adapt your coding sheet based on your logic model and based on what you are, what you are expecting in terms of data that you want or information that you want to collect from the study. So you can start with an example of a coding sheet and then develop it. And we do recommend always to create a coding sheet, code 2, 3, 4 papers and correct your coding sheets based on, because while coding a paper, you may realize that you actually forgot to include a category in your coding sheet or a detail, so that this is like a bit iterative in the
always iterative. We always end up like coding sheet version 4.final, .really final, .this level. So I think we could take a break here because after it's going to be the search thing and it's kind of it's exhaustive.
So it's okay, 12 minutes, okay.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay, so we'll come back at 10:40 if that's okay. And then for the people who are here, we have some pastries and tea and some breakfast sandwiches as well.
Thanks.
All right, nice to meet you. And sorry for the people who are here, except I know you're leaving. We're gonna have lunch in the room after, so I sent to the email with the menu, so you can choose and we'll have stuff in the box. So just take a look. So we'll get started again. Thank you so much. I'll just let you take away with the next stage.
All right, so we are at the bibliographic search phase where the main thing is please hire a librarian if you want to survive that step or keep it correctly. And the thing is, in the overall spending of a project, it's not that expensive to hire a librarian. Like in a whole systematic review, you can make a like 60 hours contract for a librarian one time, and that's it. Compared to, let's say, research assistants, we were going to hire 10 hours per week during 2 years. So actually, the librarian is not expensive, and you should have recourse to one. So this is, and I'm going to go a little bit faster, so we have time to go through like the whole thing, but some kind of insight into how you're going to build your official literature search. So according to the concepts of your study or the PICO acronym and your inclusion exclusion criteria, define your main keyword blocks. So for example, if we want to do a systematic review on risk assessment tools in the field of PPE, we at least need a keyword block that relate to risk assessment tools. And we need a keyword block that relates to in the PPE field. That's the bare minimum, and then we can go deeper if we want to. Here are some of the common pitfalls that arise is having two specific keyword blocks. So for example, if you want to assess the effectiveness of programs, and then you have a keyword block that talks about evaluation, effect size, outcomes, whatever. These are things that, while relevant, will maybe make you miss papers that just didn't talk about that in the abstract. Because remember, you are doing your research with keyword blocks in the title of it. Generally, it's at least title, abstract, and keywords. And usually we don't go for full text because not all of them are full text searchable and so. And then you need to fill the keyword blocks with the appropriate keywords. For example, risk assessment tools. What are the other ways of talking about risk assessment tool without actually saying risk assessment tool? So tools can be procedure, tools can be a scale, a risk assessment scale, a risk assessment screening or whatever. And then are there synonyms for risk and are there synonyms for assessment? So risk procedure, risk assessment scale, etc. So you kind of need to build that. If you're doing, and we're gonna have a concrete example with trajectories, because like the way to fill out your keyword block with appropriate synonyms is first if you have the luxury of having similar systematic reviews, then look on what they did and take inspiration from their keywords. But also just look into seminal papers around this topic and see how they phrase things. And the other thing is that just kind of ask ChatGPT, and on that it is scarily good. So I've tried for fun to make ChatGPT do me a systematic review, and it was terrible. So the good news is that I am not yet out of it, but for keywords it is scaringly good.
What question did you ask for?
Hey, look at that. I'm proud of it.
Oh, wow.
Here's an example of a good chat GPT prompt that I made, and I have the paid version of ChatGPT because it's kind of useful. So I said, "Hi ChatGPT." I'm very polite. So once ChatGPT goes, full Terminator on us, I would be among those left living until the end. So hi ChatGPT, I plan to do a systematic reviews on trajectories towards value radicalization. I am in the social sciences and plan to find articles, mostly in the fields of psychology, criminology, and sociology. One of my keyword blocks refer to trajectories. Can you help me find synonyms of that concept? Yours truly, So and see how good is the answer. So I can help with that. If you're discussing trajectories in the context of social science, blah, 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 you're often referring to the pathways or progressions individuals take over that end. So here's some synonyms and terms that might be useful for your review. So pathways, progression, courses, developments, pattern, trends, routes, transition, evolutions, journey, progress, phases, sequences, steps, stages. It's actually really, really, really good.
It's like he's trying to, he or she is trying to impress you as well.
Yeah, maybe that they knew that I was good at the training,
In the past, I remember there was those written thesaurus in the library. We would go to the thesaurus and open and search for our keyword and find all the other keywords. So kind of ChatGPT is that, but I think the point that Seb brought is very important. Be careful because your answer will depend on your question. So if you ask ChatGPT a not well formulated question, you will get an answer. You ask them the same question, but with a bit of formulated differently, you'll get a different answer for practically the same question. So I think the formulation of Seb is great because it provides ChatGPT the context on which it can search and suggest, and his ask is precise. So I think you could use easily ChatGPT for these kinds of things that kind of inspire us. I actually even sometimes use ChatGPT when I'm writing something and I feel like I'm missing whatever. I will tell him, I just wrote a paragraph that includes this, and this notion on this phenomenon. Like, did I forget something? And then in answer, repeated like the notions or what are the main notions of that phenomenon, and then I would discover, oh my God, yes, that was the thing that I hadn't that I couldn't use the word.
And you can also use ChatGPT in a way to kind of double check what you did. So not necessarily like use it as an end all and be all solution. You still have to look into papers, you still have to look into systematic reviews. But that can be to a good did I forget something step.
Yeah, but be careful. ChatGPT makes very weird combinations of authors, so
Yeah.
they invent articles that don't
invent
exist, so
Yeah.
really be careful about the use of
Oh, yeah,
ChatGPT in a more extended fashion.
If you want to really test that out, just ask a question that you like about yourself, like what does Fawan say about this, you know, and then they'll, what ChatGPT writes is probably inaccurate.
But here the version 4 is really that much better than version 3. So just like a little thing apart for fun, one of the things we must do as lecturers is to check if our online exams are ChatGPT proof. And at some point, I just, because you can just copy paste it. Let's say even like obviously ChatGPT for questions about broad concepts is great. Can you define, let's say the concept of I don't know, pulsion. Je sais pas parce que vous avez mais Freudian impulses or something. Then ChatGPT is gonna make you a great definition.
Drive.
Mhm.
Drive.
Okay.
Psychoanalysis, the concept of the drive.
So let's say you have an exam question about can you give me in 4 or 6 lines the notion of drive, then of course ChatGPT is gonna be great for that. But even you can copy paste question with answer choices. So let's say you have a question and then A, B, C, D, E. ChatGPT will read the question and say, I think that is likely to be true, for example. And when I was checking my exams, the version 3.5, like if I just put in all the questions, I'm gonna maybe succeeded like 50%. If I put it in version 4, we're gonna have like 95%.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's scary, but it's also, the paid version is really that much better than the not paid.
So this is a disruptive conversion.
Oh, yeah.
Because it means that we as educators have to completely rethink our assessment of knowledge, but even also what is success? So is success now learning, answering a test? So what do humans need to acquire now to be educated? That's gonna be, I think AI and ChatGPT will revolutionize them.
Yeah.
We'll have to dramatically and forever change the notion of learning and teaching and understanding. And maybe it will help us move more toward developing critical thinking capacity rather than knowing by heart XYZ concept.
And I'm gonna close the door on that because we can spend 3 hours talking about it. But I mean, at some point we had a meeting with lecturers, and there was a lecturer who was doing psychoanalytic classes like for like 30-year psych students, so actually advanced stuff, and it was a course. It was a homework on like transference and counter-transference using clinical case example. So really, kind of applied knowledge, and she actually tested that, and she ended up with a conclusion that ChatGPT is much better than students at understanding counter-transference processes. Oh yeah, that's scary. So, and then once you have your kind of list of synonyms, then you must apply truncation and proximity indicators. So truncation is so what we have in the question. So let's say I wanted to use the kind of keyword radicalization and the various ways of writing radicalization. So the truncation is like an asterisk, so it means that if the three first letters are there, no matter the rest, it will consider that abstract as in or
That's a
keyword.
quiz for you.
Okay.
So here's the pop quiz. Where would you put the truncation in the word radicalization?
Oh.
So if we were to choose A,
Yeah, that people answer.
Radish.
Anyone online would tell us where also you would put the truncation? So is it A, B, C, D, or E?
B. Sarah. C, like a B. I thought D, so we got every.
all right.
I thought
So
D.
so
What do you got?
it's good that nobody said A, because as they mentioned,
Radiator.
yeah, or radish shallot, or, you know.
You got like, I don't know what we call
Oh,
like,
radish.
noise, noise, you got so much noise.
Where radish comes from. Radish, right?
Is it?
I think.
Oh my gosh.
It's rooted.
I learned something today.
Oh.
Thanks.
Wow.
That's
Interesting, so Justin is proposing E, so let's
Okay.
discuss all of
And I
them.
said
So-
B, C, D, and E.
So
Yes.
and so radical would be a little broad. So if an abstract talks about a radical new perspective, then you're gonna have it in, even if it talks not at all about
Yeah,
radicalization.
yeah.
So
The
that
radical revolution of fashion design.
exactly,
Then you would get
exactly.
that paper.
Yeah,
But you would also get radicals, like anything in biochemistry or, you know, about radicals in general in biochemistry or medical field, and or even like electromagnetic, I think.
Yeah.
You would get it too, so.
and then if we look on D, it's nearly there. But think about American English versus Canadian and UK English. So radicalization in American English or APA English basically is with a Z. In the UK and Canada, it's with an S. So
French, in French, it's with an S.
Yeah.
If you want to include titles in French.
so because of that, I would go with C. Because that is the best balance with finding everything while not having too many false positives. So the reason why we don't put the full search is well, first of all, you're not going to have radicalization written with an S. But if there's the world radicalized, then you're not going to get it.
Radicalism.
Exactly.
Radicalizing.
Radicalizing.
So then you would get all these, but not the noise. So you have to strike that balance of sensitivity and specificity of your word. So to avoid getting too much irrelevant literature and, you know, ending up with 100,000.
Yeah, because that can happen. That can happen.
Yeah.
So the answer was C in that case. So this is the how you apply to applications. And there's also this thing named proximity search or proximity indicators. So if you say, for example, risk near tree assessment, it means that if in an abstract the word risk is maximum 3 words apart from the word assessment, then it's in. Because if you just put risk or and, in this case, risk and assessment, you could get an abstract that says risky procedures in sports, blah, 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 blah. And then we assessed whether people are running too fast, blah, 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 because there's risk at one point and assessment at the other end of the abstract. So if you want these to be near, to refer to really risk assessment, then you can use proximity indicators.
A good librarian will tell you all that, But this also will make you know if the librarian is doing a good job.
Yeah.
Yes.
And you have to be wary because proximity indicators are not the same in different databases. So for example, if you use the new version of PsycInfo is near / a number. And if you use the OVID, which is the more ancient, also more robust version, that is ADG and the number.
They will, the librarians will adapt. You give them your basic search stream and they will adapt to the different databases. Sorry, that was the word I was looking for.
And for the quotation marks, it's like you need the whole word, like the whole block of words. So let's say you put far right, because you want to do a research on far right extremism, then obviously if you put far and right, you're gonna end up with anything like an article on the fact that I'm very far from home and I had to turn right, and you're gonna get that paper, you know. So you might put it in quotes, but however, if it is not exactly what's in there, it's not going to detect it. So, for example, is there a better way to do this search string? Risk assessment, or risk evaluation, or assessment of the risk, or evaluation of the risk, or assessing risk, or evaluating. If you're working with quotation marks only, you have to basically decline all of that, and then you're gonna have like a keyword block that's gonna get this big. So, if you were to use proximity search, here's how that would look. Risk with proximity indicator, or either assessment or evaluation.
So instead of making all those, 6 lines of repeating words that come together, and then asking GPT, and GPT will add another 6 lines, you just do that phrase and with your keywords that you want to appear near, right? Like, for example, child abuse. I don't know, it could be, drug addiction or, addiction may have many words, drug may have many words.
Substance.
So you can just do that, and the kind of computer, whatever the program understands that these words have to come near each other because you're looking for a specific thing.
So here's our keyword block to ensure that we're looking at stuff about violent radicalization. So it's a doozy.
Yeah.
And one typo and it's gonna fail. So let's say you double type a quotation mark, then it fails. Okay, so hire a librarian.
Interview and do the interview.
Yeah. Then once you have your keyword blocks mapped, you're gonna have to put the whole strategy together. And so, for example, in here you have like the first block, so S1, that looks at the kind of violent radicalization aspects, and then you have the block 2, which look at trajectories of exit out of that phenomenon.
So you see words like DRAD.
So then you have to have a keyword from block 1 and a keyword from block 2 for the paper to be eligible. And so the S3 is unifying S1 and S2 in the search. And when you look at the amount of results, if I only look at papers on violent radicalization, I find 20,000. And then if I look for papers only on exit trajectories, whether it be from crime or radicalization or drugs or whatever, then we have 55,000 papers. And when we put both together, so it must have one word from S1 and one from S2, then it gets to a really more manageable around 1,000 papers. But that's one of the databases you're going to search.
Yeah.
So you have to keep that into consideration. Okay. So
the librarian may tell you, you got 1,246. Do you think this is logical, knowing the state of the literature? So you may say, yes, like 1,000 papers on this makes sense. Or if you say, oh, I'd be surprised, like I really think there may be not more than 100 papers there, then they sit again with you and they say, okay. Or they may have strategies and they find out, oh, I found out that this word is introducing a lot of noise.
Yeah, like the
So I'm
process,
gonna
for example.
remove it and I rerun the search and then you get to it, for example. So they will help you in making your search more specific without losing a lot of the important literature.
And you,
Yeah.
oh,
Sorry. Were you able to automate the solution at all? DUI or?
yes, we're gonna come, like not block
Yeah.
keywords, yeah, that exists too.
Yeah.
So, and we can also, once like Psych-Info, for example, gives you a list of papers, you can open the abstracts and it will highlight the words that it used to select the paper. So then you, if a word like process, for example, is very general, leads to a bunch of noise, then you're gonna say, okay, so yeah, this was selected because of process, but it is so out of topic that maybe that I need to put process and then maybe a proximity search, you know, to make sure that you do not get too much noise. I'm gonna go back to it. Yes, we were there. So then when you're gonna do you're gonna first test drive your final strategy, it's gonna be bad, like just accepting that you won with your life, like you the first time you're gonna put all the keywords together and run your search, it's gonna be either way too broad, or you're gonna find 3 papers and it's gonna be, whoops, we were too specific in what we wanted. So then you have to, you know, test it, modify it, test it iteratively until it is successful. And then, and usually I take one of the very popular database to do the test driving. So we usually use Psych-Info. You can use other stuff if you're in the medical field or whatever. But once you kind of, okay, this is, we honed in the search strategy, this is what we're going to use, then you have to determine in what databases you're going to search. For example, we're looking into criminal justice abstract, we're looking into Medline, we're looking into like for maybe psychiatry stuff.
Social sciences abstract,
Yeah.
like you decide, and you exclude whatever database that like is irrelevant to you. So it's your choice, you decide. You decide languages as well. You can limit, like you can say only French, English, or Arabic, or only Chinese, or limit dates also, you know, take out stuff that started at that date. So with these things, you know, in general.
Yeah, so then it must adapt the search, because some, like usually Boolean indicators, so the and or not, it's the same to all of the databases, truncations, quotation marks is the same, but proximity indicators and other type of searches are vary, so you have to adapt the search string. So that's where librarian is really useful. And then you must index the results in a reference management software and nodes.tero, whatever, into your duplicates and take notes along all the way of that stuff, because you're gonna need it for the Prisma statement.
Yes. And usually your librarian takes notes. They should not just they should not just give you the result. They should also give you the work they did. So what they searched, what search streams they used, what search words they used. Because it's important for you to track in terms of whether an error happened somewhere.
So this is an example of output that was given to us by a librarian. So each of the database, number of results after duplicates are cleared,
Yeah,
and
and
total
they give
number
you
of
that.
results.
They give you that. So,
And he also gave us, in that case, the search string that was inputted in each of the database. So let's say if near tree was changed for ADG tree, we also had that. So all of that was documented very clearly. Some considerations about the not indicator and language. So there's also, we can also exclude papers because they're out of topic. So for example, we have a lot of false positives in I don't know, like chemical studies or medicine studies, because we use an acronym that is also a molecule. Then we can say if this talks about heart surgery, we don't want it.
InCell, like you know who InCell are. And when I asked the librarian scientist to like do a first search with InCell, he got so much chemical stuff, even though it was InCell, like not separate, like not in cell, it was INCEL, but everything related to cells came up, so the nut helped, eliminate many of the not wanted aspects.
So what the nut does is that if it detects that word in the laugh track, then it's out. That's it, end of story.
Yeah.
So usually I'm much more wary about false negative than false positives. Because false positive is like paper that are essentially noise. But even if you have 5,000 results rather than 3,000, it's maybe 2 weeks of work for the research assistant to just screen this obviously non-knowledgeable paper on molecules and stuff like that. So they're even if they take time, they're kind of quick to take out.
Yeah.
However, what is really so if you do a search that is too broad, you have too many false positives and you lose time. If you do a search that has too many false negatives, then you do a bad systematic review. Because the essential stuff that you should find, you don't find it, and then you're gonna have a reviewer who's gonna say, "You idiot!" I mean, like this obviously great paper is not in. Why?
And then
Like-
it questions your entire validity.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So one thing that is really essential is, and that goes to having an expert who knows the literature. Ask an expert to come out with like 3 to 5 papers, which are prototypes of what you exactly want to find. Like if I'm doing a study on exit trajectories, then can you get me 3 papers which are exactly what I want to find and what I should find? And then if you run the search and look in the results, and the papers are not there, you have a big problem, much bigger than too much noise.
Yes.
So I have an aversion for false negatives, so I use the not indicator very sparsely. Is that fairly? Yeah. But it can be useful to take out articles that are in the medical field or clinical field when you're doing PV work. And a little bit about language. So I've come back and forth on that one. The official Campbell guidelines is you should do the search in English only, and then you're gonna get the stuff that is, let's say, in French, because usually French journals have an English version of the abstracts and of the titles and the keywords.
Or Chinese or any language, sometimes they have the English abstract.
And
So we will come.
yeah, and once a paper, and all languages should be in if they're identified by the English search. So and so at the time we were like, okay, but what do we do if we find a paper in, let's say, Russian, and then we have nobody on the team who speaks? Actually, we do, but it's an example. But if we have nobody that speaks Russian on our team, how are we going to process that paper? I mean, Google Translate is not that reliable,
Email is.
Yeah. So yeah, exactly.
We invented more reliable translation.
So at the time, we preferred to translate our whole search string, let's say, in French. So let's say we have the term trajectories, and we put trajectoire in our search, and then that means like doubling the amount of search that we do. It's kind of a rabbit hole. Like it can be really time consuming. And based on experience, doing like search in non-English languages very rarely lead on anything solid, because like good non-English journals provide usually the abstracts entitled in French, in English. So by experience, even if we went to the trouble during multiple reviews of translating everything, namely in German, we because we were asked by public safety to do a German search. We got in contact with German researcher, great team, and they made the search and
They told us nothing will come out. They said, yeah, but we have to do it. They did it and nothing came. That hadn't come out. in the English.
And this would have been true for French or any other language.
I think the key for using languages that are not English is for gray literature. So when you're searching gray literature,
Yeah.
because gray literature don't necessarily make, like in China or in any countries, they don't necessarily make an English executive summary of a report. Then it may be interesting if you have people in your team who speak different languages to try as much as possible to have them do a gray literature search in their language of origin. And maybe they can find interesting stuff. So yesterday's question of the person who said, well, the Chinese prevention, education, protection initiatives worked a lot. That would be interesting and amazing to have somebody who speaks Cantonese or other Chinese languages who does that search, because these things would never come out if we search them. So in gray literature, definitely go for multilingualistic if you can, and if you can't, well, that's okay, you're justified. You say my systematic review is limited to gray literature English. We know that there's a lot of literature likely in other languages, and this is a limitation.
Yeah, as long as you disclose it, but that's a great tip.
Yeah.
And yeah, so as I mentioned, also translation services, whether it be via ChatGPT or DeepL, have gotten so good in the last 5 years, because in 2018, we're like, never in any way we're gonna send the paper through Google Translate and try to, you know, think that we're gonna really get what the author is meaning. But in the 5 to 6 year that leads us to 2024, it's really, really good. Really, really good. Like in DeepL, you can just upload the PDF and it's gonna automatically translate it. And all of the sections, the
It
tables.
provides it to you in a PDF. You can translate PowerPoints, you just whatever.
Good, it's good.
It's really good.
Yeah, you have to go through it and make some corrections, the paid version of DeepL Pro. But I think it's definitely worth it to be bought in a department for, because it makes it really easy to translate documents in multiple. Well, we try a lot French English. I don't know about how good it is for other languages, but like it's not so bad either.
We actually so when we did the German search, we landed on one paper actually
Yeah.
that was excluded because of methodological quality.
Yeah.
So I still went through it to see how it looked, and I translated it, and it was really good. Yeah, so it works. Even for
For German.
yeah.
So
So we went over that.
Delphi process.
Yeah, so so a little tip.
Yeah.
Even though librarians are extremely good and necessary for official research, we have found that for gray literature, you're better to hire a research assistant with a little bit of knowledge of the field and to know what to look for, and the big organization, the big players, the big authors. Because the librarian will be cross-disciplinary and won't have an extensive, should not at least, or maybe does not have an extensive knowledge of your specific line of work. So for that, we found that for Grillit, RAs were actually more useful than librarians.
Yeah.
So basically for Grillit, make a very simple version of your search string. So let's say you do, let's say we go back to the risk assessment tool for in the PD space systematic review, we would have something like risk assess and the different ways of writing radicalization or extremism, and file type PDF to ensure that we're going to find PDFs only to have a manageable amount of results. So this is, but if you look at our official literature search, it's like a full page. So this is like but you cannot just enter that in Google and hope to identify anything. So by what do we mean by Grillit? Government reports, organization reports, some theses and dissertations that are not indexed, journal articles, stuff like that.
Anything that is not in a scientific journal.
And usually we prefer to use Google than Google Scholar. So we feel that because we want to go for Grillit and not official literature, using Google Scholar is kind of redundant. Google is really more broad. So,
Yeah, Google or other similar search engines,
Mhm.
but not the Scholar, like not, if you go to ResearchGate, you'll get. You can use, but you basically get the same things you get in the database.
mhm, mhm. And other little tips for Google, search in incognito mode, in order to not let your account algorithm influence the result that you're gonna get.
Yes.
Um,
Also good for flights.
also good for.
They raise the prices, the more you look for flights.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's online for flights is typical, yeah. So you'll teach me how to do it.
Mhm.
So that.
Yeah, it can be used and more for the obvious thing we're all thinking about. So,
Yeah.
you, and also specify a threshold for when to stop the search. So for example, one thing that our librarian suggested to us is that after 5 pages of irrelevant results at the rate of 10 results per page, very specific, then you stop doing that.
Sorry, one side thing, do you ever do, for Google searches, like you can do, your phrase, or whatever you're searching for, then you do type TYP:PDF, that gives you PDF, does that help get a grade literature? Because most grade literature I assume would be a PDF or.
No, sometimes you have great literature that's
Okay,
not
so there does
PDF,
help.
that's like on the webpage itself.
Yeah.
And the website itself,
And then so.
like a report, I mean, PDF would help, it really depends what you're looking for. I think if you're looking for things that may be also more artistic or more interactive, then
Mhm.
PDF would not work, like if there's an app.
Yeah,
So
that
if
makes
you're
sense,
looking
yeah,
for apps or
exclude
looking
much,
for, yeah, so you decide what you want to include in your grade literature search.
And you see on the string that we made in step 1, we actually made specified file type dot PDF. So in that case, we actually limited our results to PDF, but that would mean that we would. But I think that in the context of that review specifically, we would not have found anything on risk tools in our journal.
No, that were not.
At least not what we were looking for. A thing to remember is when you're doing guerrilla search, think about the end dates. So let's say you do an official literature search and you say we want literature up to 2023, then you cannot do that on Google. So you have to filter the results with that end date in mind. So if you land in a report that's very, very relevant, but published in 2024, then theoretically it's out. So maybe you can take note of it for the discussion, but still keep end date in mind for the guerrilla search. Because on the official lit, it's just like you tell the search to like exclude anything after 2023, but you cannot do that in literature search. Do we talk about repositories?
I don't know, because it depends how much.
Yeah, I think we should move on.
Yeah. Especially if Yeah.
The last thing I'm gonna go over very quickly is that in terms of reference checking, one of the most important steps is backward citation search. So basically, first of all, find secondary data papers that are on the same topic or similar or close to the topic you're doing a review on. So look for literature reviews, look for systematic reviews, look for meta-analyses, and look at the references of these paper, and you're for sure gonna find some stuff in there. Based on experience, the backward citation search landed on more papers than any other ways of looking, except maybe the official literature search, of course. But you're gonna find like obscure stuff that you would not have found otherwise.
So can you give a specific example? For example, if you're doing a systematic review on the risk assessment instruments for violent extremism, what would a backward search look like?
Okay, so the backward citation searching is it's written as a step for later for that, because you need your final list of eligible paper to do that. But basically, once you have, let's say, your set of 15 papers included, then you look at the references of these papers. If you find a title that is on topic, then you look for it. And if it's in, then you add it in and check the references of that new one, and etc. etc. So backward citation searching is you take your list of eligible papers and look at their few papers that they quoted. And forward is like you take a paper that's eligible and all of the papers that cited that eligible paper. And that is a lot of time. Like I would not recommend doing that unless you have way too much money and time to spend for that, because it's kind of it can be like, if you take
It's so irrelevant, you can be cited just because of sentence in your.
Yeah.
So.
yeah.
If you decided to publish a paper from some Chinese paper about that citation.
Yeah.
So now I have 20 citations that
Yeah.
have nothing to do.
Yeah,
But what about,
they're like relevant a little bit to.
yeah, well, not even that, it just,
Yeah.
but what about, have you had luck trying Google solve for this approach?
Yes. Yeah. If you want to do forward citation searching, most scholars are very good. Yeah, absolutely. But let's say you find a meta-analysis and it was cited by 2,000 papers. If it's a seminal meta-analysis in your field, you can go through these 2,000 titles. I mean,
So again, it's about the management of OCD.
yeah, and we really prefer backwards and to keep it to that. But because you need your final list of studies, like the backwards reference check comes after. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So, and as I said, gather literature and systematic reviews on your topic and look into their included paper section. That will be really, really relevant also. And then, if you were to go under the leadership of Campbell or a similar organization, that would be at the point where you submit the protocol and wait for reviews. So you have honed in your literature search, your strategy, your topic, the reasoning behind the review, and then you submit that to Campbell before conducting the search. You can start, but if they review your search strategy, and they will, then what you did is in part lost.
Waste of time.
Yeah, it's a waste of time.
So you can do absolutely a systematic review without at all working with Cochrane or Campbell collaboration. You use those methods. And your systematic review is very valid and very good. But if you ever wish to work with the Campbell collaboration for a systematic review, then know that you have many steps. And you have that protocol step, which is basically everything we've described, written, given to Campbell to review it. The advantages of working with Campbell collaboration is that it relatively has a very good reputation. So your systematic review will likely be read, cited, you will be invited to present it in conferences. And there is one other big advantage of the Campbell collaboration is that they don't take your author's rights, so you can actually publish your systematic review or a good part of it in a journal. So yeah, that's what we know. I don't know if they've changed, but that's what we know about them. It's you keep this, you can kind of publish that work. So for researchers, academics, it could be interesting because it makes it possible for you to kind of have that front and also be able to publish elsewhere in your work.
Maybe speaking to the uptake of policymakers,
Yes.
because that's of course a big so I work at Public Safety Canada. I'm the head of the Department of Public Safety. And so we provide funding to the Campbell collaboration, and then they work with research teams such as SEB and MIDA. So we work within the 5 ICE countries, so that's Canada, US, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. We provide a pool of funding to the Campbell collaboration, and then they go and fund with those research and expert teams.
Yeah.
And then we have that whole cycle of policy research and evidence that And then we use those evidence reviews to inform our policymaking in the PCBE space.
Yeah, so it's important, I think, if you want your work to be heard by policymakers or have an impact in the policy field, to work with the Campbell collaboration or Cochrane. Cochrane is more medical, but to work with the Campbell collaboration because policymakers trust the systematic reviews coming out of the Campbell collaboration. And, just to give you a mention, we finished. We're still waiting for Campbell's review, systematic review on the impact of exposure to online harms. And I know that for a fact that this work was used for the online bill. There's reference to this systematic review when we work with GIFCT, with the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism. So it's very satisfying to find that, there's this data that actually, this work is actually gets to the ear of policymakers. So.
Yeah, you just have to do the terms of engagement, which is
Yeah.
doing a systematic review Campbell version rather than just doing it yourself can usually double the time it can take.
Yes, but
But you're gonna be.
if you stand your stance, it may be really worth it. And I'd say especially for young career researchers also, because it propulse, it gives a big jump step, push for.
So that takes us to the selection phase. Once you have like your final list of papers to screen after your career lit and official lit search is done and indexed in a reference management software, then you can extract an Excel sheet with what is necessary for selection. So for example, the ID of the paper, your publication, authors, and most importantly, title and abstract, which are going to be the base material for selection. Then you add to these two columns, a column about selection that usually we like to say 0 equals no, 1 equals maybe, equals maybe, and 2 equals yes. And you have to ensure that research assistants will never put text in that box, because if you try to import it in statistical software, there will be problems. And then a comments section in order to put your reflections. Okay, I exclude that papers based on that, but I was not sure about it. So when they feel that they have to comment, they can put that in there. And it's normal is after your lit search, you end up with 10,000 papers. That's it's to be anticipated. So we've had during our reviews, let's say between 3,000 papers and let's say 11 or 12,000 papers, depending on the systematic review at hand. And after all of that, we still end up with like 23 papers or something like that. But it's normal to start at 10,000 and then end up at 20. It's not because the field is bad, it's just because that's the way of
There are
applying
no
the system.
perfect lit search that comes exactly, so you have to go through the process. Eliminating a lot.
So here's an example of an Excel selection sheet. So you have the key, which is that with the paper ID, year, author, title, abstract, and then you have like 2 columns for selection and comments that the research assistants will fill. And then when you want to compute interviewer agreements, you put these together in a statistical software package, and then you run the interviewer agreement analysis and that has multiple usefulness. So I would say that the most the obvious one is that oftentimes you need to report the interviewer agreement in the paper, so you must have computed. But even more, to me, useful is to structure training. So do a first round of training on how to select papers, on the coding manual, kind of big, and not like a 15 pages coding manual. You need 1 or 2 pages on how to check for inclusion and exclusion criteria in the title and abstract. But then you maybe do a training session where you score 50 papers together with if possible, the lead author, but also the coordinator and research assistants all together, and then you discuss why it's in or out. And then you send the RAs to score, let's say, the next 100 and 200 paper blindly, so they do not have access to the ratings of others. And then you compute the interviewer agreement, and if it's not good enough, then that means you must do more training. So you improve your training, you improve your coding manual, and then you maybe compute again the inter-rater for the next 200 papers. And at some point, we have a good enough inter-rater agreement, and then you say, okay, then you're good to go.
To
So-
code separate sets on their own.
Yeah, so once
So you validate how good they code on maybe 200 papers. You can, they don't have to code all the same, they can do that.
So ideally, all of the papers would be screened by at least 2 research assistants. Okay, so if you have 10,000 papers, it means concretely 20,000 selections. But then you can split by pairs. So let's say you have 4 research assistants, then you can send the first 5,000 papers to the first pair and the 5,000 to 10,000 to the other pair, and then they just go there.
But if you have a very good inter-rater agreement, you can easily justify why you're not doing the right stuff, but you're doing good enough stuff.
So there's info on inter-rater agreement, statistical computation, but I think I'm going to go for that.
Yes, no, because we.
And then after all of the papers are going to be selected, there are going to be discrepancies. So papers rated as yes by research assistants and no by another one. So then organize meetings and resolve these discrepancies. You can ask and at that point you can unblind the work. So we can all just ask the research assistant to come together to talk about it and to come to a decision, but also as a coordinator be available, because often disagreements will remain, and then you need to and that can be very useful training material. So let's say, okay, so that's one thing I really do often, and especially at the start of the process where you're still doing the training. So let's take all of the disagreements and resolve them together in a meeting. So then the kind of point of contention is discussed.
Yeah.
So that helps for the future selections. And at that point, less meetings will happen, and it will be more like up until then, like the lead author has to be really involved. Once we get into selection and coding, then the lead author can take a break and go on with their lives, and it's really the job of the coordinator and the research assistants to do that job. And sometimes we go to the lead authors, hey, we have a question, a difficult one, can you help? But I mean, we're not going to ask the lead author to give us advice each time there's a selection discrepancy. It's just not realistic. So at the end, you have the full inter-rater agreement for all of the selection. That's with title and abstract. Then you go with the full text. So hey, so
Like a salad, endless.
exactly. So let's say you have 10,000 papers. After the selection, you have maybe, let's say 200 that people said, oh, this, and after discrepancies were resolved. So you have a bunch of papers that are agreed upon as to yes or maybe. So then you ask the librarian to find the full text of all of these. And some will be easy, like let's say it's a I don't know, like a science paper or like a really well-known journal, you're gonna have access to it with your university portals. But some weird book chapters, full books, maybe really hard to get unless you have access to a librarian. So you ask a librarian to just make a PDF, a folder with all of the PDFs of the text, and then you dispatch the full text to a research assistant, still in pairs to be sure.
Yeah.
And then they rate the paper as a yes or no based on, at that point, once they have the full text, they should be able to select according to all of the inclusion and exclusion criteria, no matter how specific they are. So at that point, all the papers that are in, the only reason why a paper should be left out after that is because it failed method screening. So it's the last part of excluding papers.
Yeah, so let's say after the 200, you come out with 50 papers that are eligible, that meet your inclusion exclusion criteria based on reviewing the text. The only reason why you would exclude that paper, another set of paper, as Seb said, is that if it's of too poor methodological quality, it does not make your minimal of sound methodology. So ideally, you keep your 50, but you may let go a few and end up maybe with 40 or 30, depends on like methodological things.
And again, you
Then
need
you
to take.
start the coding.
Yeah, and again, you need to take notes of why the people, the
Yes.
papers were excluded, so.
Yeah.
You have to differentiate the amount of paper excluded for methodological quality from those that are excluded because they're just out of topic, or they don't satisfy one of the inclusion criteria. So you kind of.
You report that in your findings.
In the
you know,
Prisma.
papers.
The Christmas.
Oh,
the
according to
Prisma.
the Prisma
Thinking-
statement,
Oh,
you have it.
Yes, it's.
You have a copy of the, like, an example of a Prisma statement.
Yes, at the end, I think.
This
Yes.
is you see it on the right.
Oh, there are two different
This is-
Christmas statements.
Yeah, so two examples,
Okay.
but this is the Prisma statement. So identification is how many records were identified, which databases, etc. The duplicates removed, then you do a screening, title, and abstract, and you basis title, you get that, and then eligibility, so that would be the second screen. The first screening is title and abstract, the second screening is eligibility.
Exactly.
Inclusion, exclusion criteria, full text. And then, you maybe have excluded some because of methodological quality, insufficient quality, you can see it, manuscript excluded because of insufficient quality. And then you end up with included. And this is the primary, secondary, and tertiary review, so you see the numbers of papers we included for our primary, secondary review, and the numbers included for our tertiary.
Yeah. So that's a Christmas statement, and it needs to be well documented, then it's a pain if you don't do it, like along the way.
Are there any essential things, or we're gonna go very quickly through the Delphi
Yeah,
process
so-
right now,
I'm
but
wondering. We should have a follow-up to this.
I mean, I
really need to do a follow-up, we could get on Zoom all together and get part two, just so we don't have to, it feels like it's don't rush too much, but I also,
yeah,
I don't know if that.
yeah, as you wish, of course.
Okay.
We can not talk about the Delphi at all and talk about it at a second.
We could do more.
It's really what you and
Yeah,
the
what do you
people
prefer?
online feel like. I mean, we did go into a lot of details on how to conduct a
Which is
systematic
so great,
review.
that's what I really enjoy.
Yeah.
So I was feeling we could do a part two of this.
Sure.
Like.
We could look at the Delphi process in the back too.
We could get you for another.
Yeah, the Delphi process would be for part two, so we can
Perfect.
finish
Yeah.
the
You
systematic
can do it
review.
fully on Zoom.
Yeah, so
if you want.
For those participants on Zoom, we Thanks, yes, yeah, so we're just for saying that we are gonna stay at the same pace, even though there's a lot more material to cover. And we will have another session on Zoom, and we'll invite everybody who's on Zoom right now, we'll invite you to that follow-up, so I think it's good, because it's such good.
Yeah,
I think it's like, it's like golden tips here, so.
and we're
And
still.
I think the Delphi process, you can also invite,
Yeah.
you can open it, like
Yeah,
people
we'll-
who have
yeah.
not seen this
Yeah,
can see the
Okay.
Delphi process, it's just gonna be a bit of not obvious for them what we mean when we say that we did the systematic reviews, but maybe people are familiar, so they can jump to the Delphi process.
Sounds good, okay, so yeah.
and the cool thing is that the Delphi process is a way less complicated procedure, really more concrete, so we can have, like, if practitioners wanna hop in, it's like,
I love that.
more intuitive, so.
Yeah, my favorite.
And we're still gonna have a video of conclusion, because we're gonna close the systematic review and keep the.
And we can even for fun, like make a fake mini Delphi process.
Oh, that would be
It's a
nice.
session itself.
Oh, that's
That's
neat.
fabulous. Okay, so we'll talk about that later, we'll let everybody online know as well what we're gonna do next. Take it away, last 20 minutes.
Alright, so we are at the coding phase, so once we know the final number of papers that are eligible based on title, abstract, and then full text, then we go into the coding phase. So, as I mentioned, this is a point of failure, because now after selection by title and abstract and full text, we go upon methodological quality screening. So there's where it happens, and I mean, this is complicated for high-level researchers, so it's gonna be complicated for research assistants. So you really need to implement good training in research methods, qualitative and quantitative. So I put some notes. So RAs should be able to tell the difference between a cross-sectional and longitudinal study. The same being true for what is the difference between retrospective and prospective studies, experimental versus quasi-experimental studies versus correlational versus model. So, but basically, they kind of, and they also need to kind of understand, let's say you're doing a systematic review on a psychometric scale, research assistants probably need to know what is the factor analysis and globally how it works. So if you're doing intervention, then you need to do the training on what are commonly found effect sizes, so AUCs, correlations, stuff like that. So t-test or what have you. So they kind of need to train them to, when they're going to stumble upon that, kind of know what this paper is about, and if they, like, let's say, read a table, kind of globally know the results that come out of it. So, and you also need to do training for qualitative studies if you include such studies. What are the main data collection procedures, but also data analysis procedures. So one thing that we found, at least in the PVE field, in the qualitative studies, is that oftentimes qualitative study was like, okay, so they describe the method of data collection, we did interviews, focus groups, ethnographic observation, and then they just give you the results, and you're like, okay, how was the data analyzed? Is it thematic analysis? Did they use in vivo? Did they use stuff like that? And oftentimes just, here are some quotes and our results, and you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Yeah. And so they need to be trained to look not only for the fact that they conducted interviews, but how they aggregated data together, what their thought and structuring process for that.
They kind of need to be trained to become like mini researchers.
Mm-hmm.
To know what a good research is, what it takes, and to be able to differentiate good from irrelevant information for your systematic review. So the good thing to go about it is really to code with them, maybe 1 or 2 papers from time to in the beginning, and also maybe from time to time just to double check that the work is being well done. So you'd have the lead, the 2 leads, you'd have maybe an expert that you'd invite and the RAs, and everybody reads 3 papers and codes them. And then, you know, you share the way you code or comments on the way you coded. And then you often, they learn very well this way how to do good coding.
Yeah, and they're gonna get better than you. I mean, I've had a few instances where we were discussing whether a paper should be unread, and I said, oh, I think that's a clear no. And then the research assistant tells me, yeah, but wait, but I think that because of this, it should be yes. And I'm like, oh, you're actually totally right. So I mean, they're gonna, if you do your job well, the students will overthrow the masters.
So maybe I think there's one example of how when you take the time to be prepared to do that coding, you win a lot on time. When we did the tertiary prevention systematic review, it could have been very easy for the RAs, for example, just to copy or to summarize the papers, copying the abstract, which basically provides no information. Or they could have, for example, just said, this program included psychotherapy, vocational counseling, like in the description of the details of the program. That's cool, but it doesn't give you much information. Where actually we had RAs who had put really the smart details we needed for the systematic review. So the programs, but also to whom the programs were given, and then the outcomes associated with the programs. So if a program had, for example, educational counseling, vocational counseling, psychotherapy, they didn't just put like a psychosocial program. They put that details. So we were able then to say what worked in a program. We were able to, like, after in a table, collect all the specific activities that were made in the different programs by their type, but by their outcome. And that made us discover that, oh, vocational counseling is coming up 10 times in different programs, and 5, 6 out of the 10 times it was a positive effect, 3 out of the 10 times it was a negative effect. So, you know, like having RAs who really understand what you need to look for can provide this richness of detail that actually can make you do like not only a systematic review of prevention programs are effective or not, but a systematic review, for example, of what is effective with whom and what when it's not effective. So it gets through that granular, very rich detail.
And that's why training cannot be underemphasized. And other thing that can, and if you're at one point and you're gonna lose, like doing training is time now that will save you time in the future.
Yeah.
So for example, if at the end of the coding phase, you realize that one of the research assistants basically did not do a really good job, then you have to put other research assistants to reselect and recode the paper. There is such
All
time.
these are based on experiences we've had, so it's very time consuming for everyone involved, because then you also need to review everything. And you could easily then actually write a systematic review that is not valid.
Because, and one of the things that I mentioned about having smart research assistants going beyond the abstract, one of the things that came up that then you have a paper that assesses a program, and they define the program as a secondary prevention program. They looked upon it, and then the research assistant is like, based on our definition, this is not a secondary prevention program. This is a primary prevention program. And then we're like, oh, really? And then we look at it, and indeed, even though the author self-defined the program they worked on as a secondary prevention program, it was actually a primary PD program according to how we defined it in our definition of terms. And that means that in the aggregation of outcomes, this study is not going to be in the same place. It's going to be with our primary prevention programs. And then if we find afterhand that primary prevention programs are, let's say on average, less effective than secondary PD programs, then what program is classified where is really important.
So I'll give you an example, but I do invite everyone to waste maybe 1 hour of their time and read our systematic review on tertiary prevention programs, where you in the CVE space, where you will see quite some detail about how we say, how come, researchers don't clearly distinguish DRAD from reintegration. And then we say what works, and vocational counseling. Like, I think there's, in the key findings, there's a discussion. It's a long report, maybe more than an hour, but you will find a lot of details. And I can tell you that when Seb and I, and particularly my part, when I wrote all this, I had read none of the papers. I had read the RA's summary and coding tables. And I had all the information I needed to extract well-advised conclusions. So if they do the good work, the lead authors can do the work that RAs cannot do, and I'm not doing this to undermine RAs, but as lead authors, we have macro understanding, so we don't need to read papers and summarize, but we need, like, they put the pieces of the puzzle and we know how to glue it because of our knowledge. But we don't need to go search and find the puzzle, they find it. So it's a very like intersectional multiplicative work. And I really did not read any of the I read after or, before in my life, but during the systematic review, I was not reading. But just looking at the Excel sheets and the summaries, I like when like it's a blurred painting, but there's something in it. When you look at it, it's blurred and you fix for 3 minutes and the painting appears. It was exactly that. I looked at that and it all appeared. So invest time and energy, and then when they become good, keep them.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
Don't let them go.
Well, that's what you're saying, that's a bit, it changes the students, they just, especially master's students, they're only in the program for 2 years.
Yeah.
But then they can come back as independent RAs and
Yeah.
have like fairly short contracts, if they like it, so.
That's a good point, though, that the research is only as good as the information that you're given as the lead researcher. And that's it really is at the front.
Yeah.
It's really front loaded into this process.
Yeah.
Where you have the
Yeah.
systems in place, you have the RAs trained, you use every opportunity as a learning experience so that you can learn.
Yeah.
Very well.
And us as, faculty, it's our job to train the future generations, so it's an essential part of the work we do. We transmit that, so, sorry.
But and when you look at training, for example, for the quantitative methods, I put together 3 blocks of 3-hour training, so 9 hours in total. So that's kind of a lot. But then again, for let's say the coding phase, the research assistants will be coding papers for like half a year, 10 hours or 13 hours per week. So yeah, you put 9 hours in, but then they each of them make 300 hours in for the next months, and you're gonna be like 5 months and just checking, okay, do I collect the dispatch? Do they give me what the problems and that's it. So front leaning process. You're totally right.
Yeah.
So we have 5 minutes left.
A quick thing to note, if a paper fails method checking, you can stop there. You're not required to code the full paper because you're gonna exclude it in the end. And you can code it if you want to, but it could be considered as a loss of time because it's gonna be out anyway. And like the coding phase is the longest phase. You dispatch because if people are there for like 10 hours per week, then they can maybe do 2 to 3 papers per week maximum. So if you have like, I don't know, 50 papers, then it's gonna take a lot of weeks. So do we want to end there?
Well, continue to see what's, I think.
So this is the
Yeah,
polling
this
sheet,
polling sheet.
whatever.
I'm leaving, if there's any questions from the virtual audience, I'm also inviting them to ask me questions, so that we can keep going for 5 minutes.
Well, this is we covered.
So we already covered that. And then we're at the redaction, but that honestly could be integrated in the Delphi training.
Yeah, I think we can integrate that, yeah, let's integrate that in the Delphi training, because we can do just a small reminder of the systematic review, like phases, and then writing, because it's connected to the Delphi, so, yeah, sure.
So we can go to the audience questions.
And so just to answer an earlier question, we just stood out here, to answer an earlier question about the material, so the video will be posted, so this is a great training video, I think, for students who are gonna get involved in a systematic review process. This could be a great orientation overview. So we'll post that for everybody who can access that on the Chris website as well as the GOG YouTube channel and then later to you as well if you want to post a video as well. So, yeah, any questions for both the audience here or from our virtual audience?
And just before we get there, know that we talked about our report, so
yes.
eventually there is a reference section in the PowerPoint. Eventually. Where is it?
Yeah, it's there. There you go.
Okay, so at the last slide, basically you have all of the systematic reviews and Delphi process that we either talked about or were about to talk about. So you have everything in there. It's on the CPL Prev website. So for those that want to see concretely how we did our things, it's there.
And I think, I mean, eventually if some people would like to know more or to be accompanied through the process of like starting a systematic review, I think we're more than happy to help, because this is 3 hours, but this is actually like a 1 day, 2 day full, if you wanna unpack every step and develop that knowledge. I think we can even think of, I'm just like flying out ideas, I think we can even think of some student exchange, like they can be observants in while like the SEX team is doing the work, and like they could come and do like a participate if you want, said we could think about it, but like in observation sessions too.
We even record our meetings, so.
And I think in anyone around the table or online, if you are interested by Campbell systematic reviews, like go on Campbell, and most importantly, I think get in touch with David, because at the Canada Centre you set some priorities for Campbell topics, and you know that might help in getting funding for your teams to do a systematic
Campbell's always looking for
on
new research teams,
topics.
on
Yeah.
topics.
And Campbell is not just about CVE, yeah? Campbell is the social sciences, so they do systematic reviews on hundreds of topics. So if you go on their website, you will find, and I think they also have calls for funding and proposals, right? For conducting certain systematic reviews, so definitely if you want to develop practice guidelines for any topic of interest for your field in Canada, systematic reviews is a good first step to do that, so.
So much, these slides are so comprehensive too, it's so helpful to go through the steps of the stages, so really appreciate it.
I didn't sleep much in the last night.
I know. It's such a great resource for us, and I'm so grateful. I'm feeling like I really want to do a systematic review, like I want to talk with Karen, like what we're gonna do for a systematic review, but I'm also terrified to do it, because it's so much, it's so big, right? It's very exciting. Yeah.
We can do it together.
Interesting.
It's actually very. Honestly, I have grown to prefer doing systematic reviews than just literature reviews, because the fact that it is structured, you're kind of never lost in the process.
Right, if you're doing a lit review, like it's just a general review, you can just.
You can get
like,
lost,
right?
yeah, whereas that is structured, like you know that you've done step 1, now it's step 2, step 3. And what I think was really great, given, you know, being a totally chaotic person myself, is that in systematic reviews, you can go back at any time. If you have a question or if you have a doubt about something, your information is there. Every single thing is traceable and it has a logic. So no one can tell you, where did you get that from? From there, you know, it's there. Okay, this has limitations, yes, but I mean, it's mentioned, so.
Of course. Thank you so much. I'll leave it at that review. I just don't want to keep it even too long, but thank you so much again. That was wonderful.
Well, thank you for your generosity.
Thank you to our virtual audience as well for joining us and sticking around. So thank you very much. Great to see you all, and we'll be in touch about future trainings, the next workshops. Thank you.
And get in touch, don't hesitate. We're hoping to create some exchanges between Laurie and